Have you noticed that animated movies look so much better than the actual shows they are based on? Why does it look better? What I'm about to show you I learned by working with the pros in the industry, breaking down the process that animation studios use, and my personal experience in the last 7 years. Let's create movie quality post-production for your own animations.
We bring you tonight's exciting story.
What is the goal of post-production? It's where all your hard work that went into creating your animation can finally be polished. What's most important for this is post-production will always serve the story, and every decision you make should be guided by what do I want my audience to feel. This is the scene that we are about to work the post-production on, and as you can see, Seraphim is going
to space.
Now this is for a music video I'm making, and let's just say that this might be Sarah's last minutes on this spaceship. We'll be using After Effects as it is an industry standard. When you open After Effects, this is what you're going to see. You can just close this window and we'll work here. Now if by any chance I have panels that you do not have, all the panels are under Window, and here they all are. Now before we start importing our scene, go to Edit, Preferences, Import Settings. In here you want to set at what frames per second the program should import every single image sequence. I have it at 24 since it's an industry standard, and that's what I would recommend you to do too. Once you have set this, you can click OK, and now right click and click on Import. Let's go with multiple files. I will go to my renders folder, and here I have divided every scene into backgrounds. I'll select everything in here and click Import. And they have been added to my project window. Then I go back to renders, sequences, my scene, and here we have each one of the passes. Now for what passes to export, the more separation you have, the more control you will have. This was all done in Clip Studio Paint, but you can use whichever software you prefer. I have my background layer. I also separated the chair's arm just so it can be on top of the character. And I have an animation folder for each of the passes that I need. My line art pass, then I have my color pass, and finally I have her hair. I only painted the pink color, because we will do the gradient inside of After Effects. I also painted a shadows pass, and one detail I want you to see is the shadows that are on top of her skin I painted with a different color. You don't really need to do this, but I like doing it, as it adds a little more warmth. I see some artists who paint the shadows one frame after the other, but what I recommend is you actually animate the shadow guidelines while you're cleaning up your keyframes. That way they will stay more consistent. Now to export, I need to remember to turn off whatever background we have until it's completely transparent and leave only the layers for the pass that I'm exporting. For example, the line art. You want to export your character animation as a PNG sequence with transparency. PNG files are great as they not only have transparency, but also a great balance between quality and size. So let's say I want to import the line art. I can click on any of this, and we have our sequence options. And it's forcing it to import from the first image to the last number that has that same name. Just click Import, and it just imported the entire image sequence of that pass. So we will do that for each one of this. I click on Done. If it's a short animation and you want to loop it, you can always right click, go to Interpret Footage, Main. Over here, you can select how many times you want it to loop, and it will do it automatically. Instead of dragging one of these into our timeline, what I will do is create a new composition. Here you can type a standard resolution like 1920 by 180 pixels, and the frame rate we want to change to 24. The duration of the scene, we know it's 5 seconds. Click OK. Okay, now we can start importing. Let's do first our background, just by dragging it onto the timeline, and then our character. The way the timeline works is you have each one of your passes is a different row, and moving to the right, you're controlling your time. If I move just after the first second, you'll see that the background has disappeared. That's because our background layers only last, you can see here, for 1 second. I can select them and stretch them with my mouse. Now they last for the entire sequence. But if I zoom out, everything is getting cropped. This is because this is my final output, but we want a way to be able to work on all of this without it being limited by the frame. What we will do is select everything inside of the scene, and in your keyboard click Ctrl-Shift-C. and create a pre-comp. A pre-composition is another timeline inside of your timeline. So this one I will call Sarah Spaceship Full. Leave this on, click OK. Now everything is inside of this composition, Sarah Spaceship Full, and if I double click, I go inside. You can also go back and forth between the two as they become tabs also. And in this pre-composition, I can go into composition and composition settings. And here is where you can modify your composition's size and even correct its duration. Now we can work on here freely. And if I go back to this one, this is our export. I can make it smaller and change the framing, but we'll worry about this in a bit. For now, let's just focus in here. So another important thing is whatever is above in the timeline is also on top. So of course, what I want to be on top of everything is the line art. Let's move closer to see what I'm doing. And if the preview looks too low quality, you can always change the resolution here to full resolution. The higher the resolution, the more time it will take to show you this preview. So let's go back to a third. So we have the line art, then we would have the shadow, and then both the hair color and the character color. But before we get started with the actual post-production, we need to talk about color theory for post. It's easy to get lost looking at examples like this. The first thing we need to do is we need to think like a camera, especially when it comes to values. We've talked about this in other videos. Values are the scale from total darkness to complete white. You see, cameras have a limited range of values that they can show. Everything below the darkness limit gets crushed into pure black, and everything above the brightness limit into pure white. So we have to make the most of the entire range. Pushing your values is the most important aspect to make your shots look more cinematic. It's the reason why a show like this can look like this. And the way we imitate this in animation is by using effects. For this, we have to talk about the effects and presets panel. The first thing we're gonna do is make sure our background has enough range of values. So for that, I will go to my search bar and look for a levels effect. Grab it and throw it on top of the background. And the effect will open right here. This one, I do have to make this a little larger to see it fully. In here, I can play with the value range. So I can move the middle ground and then bring back the highlights. With this button, I can preview the effect on and off. And you can see how I'm forcing the lighting to be stronger. Now I will present you an alternative. I will actually delete this and we will go to Layer, New, and add an adjustment layer. This is one of the most powerful tools in After Effects. It only carries the information of the effects that we want to apply. So now let's do the same thing, grab the levels, and throw it on the adjustment layer. Do something similar. And right now, if I turn it on and off by clicking on the I button, you can see it's also affecting the character. And we do not want that. So I will just move it below, as it only affects whatever is below it. This way I can apply the same effect to everything that's underneath it instead of going layer by layer. But another great advantage is I can press T on my keyboard to bring up the opacity menu and lower its opacity. And with that, I am playing with the intensity of the effect. Levels are not the only way we can modify our values, but as we move forward, we'll see other ways. Let's rename this. Moving on to my character, it really doesn't feel like he is in there. Even if I turn on my shadows pass and use a blending mode by clicking under mode and switching it to multiply, if you cannot see these options, you have to click right here. Click to go back. His local colors don't feel right for the scene that he is in. This is why we need to talk about integration. We've also talked about this in other videos. In the real world, light is always bouncing around, contaminating everything else with its colors. We want to do the same to our local colors. For this, I will grab the local color layer, duplicate it by clicking Ctrl D, and now for this one on top, I will go to my effects presets and look for hue and saturation, and throw it on top. In here I can play with the hue of these colors, its saturation, and even its brightness. But there's an extra button that says colorize. Now everything has been tinted by the same hue. I will search for a hue that's closer to the scene that we're in. Perfect. We can increase the saturation a bit. And now by using a color blending mode, we will apply it on top. And you can see this doesn't work right now. I will press T for my opacity and throw it to 0. But check this out, as I start bringing it up, there is a point, let's say around 20%, where suddenly the colors feel like they are actually contaminated by the light that's bouncing in the scene. This integration pass is what allows us to use whatever color palette we want, while still just worrying about painting the local colors of my character. This way you can use the color of light to tell a story. But how do we know what colors to use? The key to this, as in everything in art, is to use references. But to know which references to search for, I recommend you create a color script, which is an exploration of what story your lighting and color will tell in each scene. Then based on that color script, you can create your mood boards for each of the specific sequences. You'll notice when you start gathering enough references for one sequence, there will be a common denominator. That is the mood that you're going for, and you can see how I applied it to each one of my scenes. Let's apply all of this to our scene. I will click on the character hair color and go to Layer, New, Solid. A solid is just a shape of a single color. Right now it will fill the entire screen, and I will fill it with her normal hair color. Click OK. Now it's on top of everything. And what we will do is, while selecting the solid that we created, go to the rectangle tool and click it to create a mask. I will drag it across the screen, right at the point where her hair gradient will start. And see, the solid is only lasting for a single second, so I have to stretch it to the end of the composition. And by clicking on this arrow, click again to open the mask options, and you can go to the feather option, which is how soft its edge is, and make it bigger. So it gives us that gradient for her hair. In After Effects, clipping works a little different. I have to duplicate my hair layer by clicking Ctrl D, and now I have to place it on top of the blue solid, and in the solid go to this option and select the matte to be the hair color, and now it's working. Okay, let's create an integration pass, but this time I will select all the layers that have the character's main color and click on Ctrl-Shift-C to create a pre-comp. Now we have all her color excluding the line art. Let's close this. I will duplicate this comp using Ctrl-D and repeat the process that we just learned. In this scene, the integration is very subtle, but you can see cases like this hallway scene where the integration actually carries a lot of weight. I will turn our shadow layer to a multiply blending mode. And now that we know how to lower the opacity, we will press T. This one, I think around 60% is fine. Okay, so far so good. Now we can start working with gradients. That's another reason why we made this pre-comp with the entire contents of her color, because this also works as selection. If I duplicate it and place it here on top of the line art, turn off its opacity, because we don't need it, it's only going to be a mask. We can make a new solid. Let's use a color like this one. Maybe saturate it a little more and make it more greenish. Click OK. Extend it to the end. And now we have this. Again, we're going to make a mask. By selecting the mask, you can move it around. Or if you click over here, you can actually move the points. So let's do something like this. And give it around 1000 pixels of feather. Set it to multiply. And the final touch, place the Sarah color precomposition on top. And again, on the solid, we will select this to be a matte. There we go. See, now there's a gradient on top of the entire character. This is quite dark, so we will lower its opacity to 50%. You see how there's some shadow on the seat? You can repeat this as many times as you like, using solids to create gradients and then masking it to your character. This one, I will just use the pen tool to do something like this. Move this on top. Let's just set it to multiply. We can make it so it's not there at the start, and only after this drawing we start having this. To change the colors of the solid, all I have to do is go to Layer, Solid Settings. Let's make it more saturated, but lower its opacity. I actually like it quite a bit. So just like we have a gradient from below, we could have another one from behind. So I will duplicate the one we already have and press R to get my rotation options. Rotate it by changing the value and move it into position by using the arrow keys. There it is. This is a hack that I use a ton, and at the end of this video I will show you 10 more secret hacks that I used in post-production that will level up your game. I also recommend you give my cel shading video a watch after this one, as it will teach you all about the steps we're going to apply so you know how to export your animation correctly. Using solids to create gradients is not limited to just your character. You can also use it on top of your background to push your values, or even to make corrections. For example, here this pillow was calling too much attention, so I painted it down using a solid. And look at how much difference these 3 gradients do. A few gradients on top of your background, both for shadows and highlights, can make a ton of difference. This is another way you can push your values. One thing that's bothering me, so we're gonna do it right now, is create a new solid on top of the background using the same color. By clicking and holding here, I can change the rectangle to an ellipse and do a shape like this. Again, opening the mask, clicking here, I can change the points a little bit. I can use the pen tool to add another point over here. And with Control pressed, I can play with the tangents. I think it's a little noticeable what I'm doing, so turn it to a multiply blending mode and the feather to 500 pixels. And I will animate its opacity. But for that, we need to get into how to animate in After Effects using keyframes. So far we have seen T for opacity or transparency and R for rotation. But we also have P for position, where you can control the X and Y values of a layer, and finally S for scale. And the cool thing is you can set keyframes to all of these values, but not only in terms of translation, but also to any layer property or effect. To show or hide the keyframes that you already set, you can use the U key. And let's look at what we did here. This is the stinger that I use at the start of every video, and there are a bunch of things happening together. First, we have the typical lens flare, created by just painting a brush stroke like this, and then setting it on top with a linear dodge blending mode. But how do we animate it? Let's click on the stopwatch to delete all keyframes and throw its opacity back to 0. If I wanted it to start on second 2, I will first click on this stopwatch to start recording keyframes. Then I will move to the point in the timeline where I want its opacity to be the strongest and change the value to 50% opacity. And look at what happened automatically. It created the keyframe. Then I can go a second further and throw it back to 0. And this is what's going on right now. You can see it's very subtle, but it's coming in and out. This is what I'm doing to every one of these layers. But in the case of the body parts, what I'm controlling is its position and rotation. Let's focus on this feet. I set a keyframe to its position and rotation to start moving, and I set another one for its final pose. Now you may notice that the entire character is zooming in, and this is actually not one of the things that I'm animating in this specific layer, but rather I'm using another type of layer, which is a null object. Let me delete this one to show you what it does. As soon as I deleted it, the character stopped zooming in. So let's go to Layer, New, and Null Object. A null object is a layer that, similarly to the adjustment layer, it has no information in it. But you can't apply any effects to this one. Rather, this is a layer where you can apply animations to it, and then I can grab all the pieces of my character, for example, and using this button, clicking and dragging and dropping it on top of the null. So now this null is my parent for all of these layers. So if I set a keyframe to my position and scale on this null by clicking on the stopwatch icon, and I go further ahead and change its value, see how it created a keyframe automatically? Now all the layers that were parented will have that animation applied to them, aside from the animation that they already had, which is the rotation and movement to make it seem like she's assembling. Now there's something else you will notice. These keyframes look different. This is because they have acceleration and deceleration. To do that, let's go back to my null. You just have to right click on a keyframe, go to Keyframe Assistant and select Ease In or Ease Out, depending on what you want. Ease Out is acceleration, so it starts slowly, where it barely moves, and then suddenly it moves way more. And then Ease In is deceleration, where the object starts moving less and less the closer it is to the keyframe. You can see this in a more graphical way by clicking on this button to go to your graph editor. And here you would be able to modify how the movement is happening. See, right now I'm making the acceleration and deceleration way stronger. Click on the graph editor again to go back. So it will barely move at first, then it will zoom in rapidly, and finally decelerate into its second keyframe. I also used opacity to give the illusion that her chest and her eyes are turning on, but it's just layers on top. Now to set keyframes when your stopwatch is already set is by clicking on this button. Since we are using acceleration and deceleration, this one was added with ease, but we might not want that. So I can just hold Ctrl and left click on it to remove the acceleration or deceleration. Another way to set keyframes when working with still images is what I have done with the hair. See how it has a little bit of motion? This was done by using this tool right here, the Puppet Position Pin tool. Let's go to the hair layer and press U to see all its keyframes, and you can see there's a bunch of them. This is because I set these pins, and once you set them, it will create a keyframe, and then you can just go further in the timeline to change how it moves. Let's just do a quick test, so I will delete this. So I will go to the final position that I want, go to my Puppet Position Pin tool, and start setting keys. This is creating a mesh, and it's important that you set enough pins in the places where you don't want it to move, so it has a reference, and then set others where you do want to move it. Again, if I press U, there have been keyframes set to all of these points. I can now go to another point in my timeline, select any of the puppets to see all of them, and then just start moving them. You want to be subtle with this tool, as too much movement will look very jarring. Okay, we did this, and let's see what happens. And there we go. It is a subtle movement. Going back to our scene so we can talk about how to set keyframes to our mask paths, click stopwatch button to create a keyframe. We're actually going to move this ahead, and then I will turn the opacity to 0. Look at what will happen right now. Go over here, create a new keyframe. When she separates a little bit from the seat, lower the opacity to around 80. See how when she separates the opacity lowers, but it's still dark enough so it feels like she's near. And here we will animate the shape of the mask by closing it, open it again, and then we have the mask options. And here in the path, I will set a keyframe in the stopwatch. Here is our final position, and here we want it to be only her lower back. This is what we have so far. There we go, this looks way better. We can also set keyframes to any of our effects. So you can see here, I'm using blur to guide the eye from the right of the scene to the left. To see my effects, I need to click on my effects controls, and I have 3 pieces to this scene. One is the wall in the background. You can see where my painting skills fall apart. I have the tube in the background and the monitor in the front. Let's bring back the background. And if I grab this two and press U, we can see the keyframes that we set. Of course, from here, one will have its blur effect go from 0 to 15, while the other does the opposite. So when the blur starts on this one, it disappears from this one. But how do we set this blur? Let's delete it on both. And in my effects and presets, I will look for blur. And you'll see After Effects actually has a ton of them. We'll talk about them throughout the video, but the one I love the most for cinematic effects like this one is the camera lens blur, which of course imitates a real camera lens blur. So once I set it, normally effects start with a certain value already. You got to be careful. If you don't want this to be out of focus from the start, turn it back to 0. But then you will notice that right next to this value is the same stopwatch effect. Here's where it gets interesting. You could actually set keyframes to any of these specific values in this effect. And you can do that for every effect. That's how in-depth this could be. But for now, we're going to set a keyframe here to the amount of blur. And then going over here, we're going to set it to 15. Then we'll do the same for this object. So camera lens blur, we'll set a keyframe. At first, set it to 15 from the start, and then we set it to 0. And that is one way you can guide your audience to switch from one focus point to another. And with this, let's move into camera movement. Let's go back outside to our first composition. There's a cheeky cinematic trick that I will do, and it's create a new solid and make it completely black, extend it to the entire scene. And in my composition settings for the main composition, we will change the height to just 800. and click OK. Now on this black solid, I will go back to my square and create a mask right at the borders, and then click on this button for the mask to be inverted. Now we're going back to the composition settings that I had before, so back to 180. And what we have now is a set of black bars that make it look really cinematic. Now let's decide on the framing for the scene. We have enough material for it to start really far away. So let's press P for position, S for scale, and set a keyframe for both. If I press U, I can see both keyframes. And from here to here, we will increase the scale a tiny bit and move the camera to the side. So we're basically zooming in. To create this zoom, we are obviously setting keyframes to our scale. But why are we also setting keyframes to our position? You see, if we only animate scale, it will only zoom into the center of the scene. If you also animate the position by using your arrow keys and shift, the zoom won't be into the center, but rather onto the point that you set. I did the same thing in the scene right next to it. See how it's actually zooming into the character? That's because it's not only animated the scale, but also the position a bit. We're gonna right click these keyframes, go to the keyframe assistant and click on ease out. So it starts little by little, and it's gonna zoom in until here for this one. So we're gonna right click and click ease in. Let's take a look into more advanced applications of camera movements. Parallax consists of zooming in different layers at different speeds to create the illusion of depth. A great example is here, where I have different layers for the front of the car, character, the seats, back of the car, and finally the dad character in the background. If I press U, you can see all the keyframes. Every one of these has a different amount of zoom. The further back a layer is, the less it will move. You can do the same effect towards the side to generate the illusion that we're moving. Obviously, I also helped it a ton using blur to change the focus, so when we start focusing on this character, this one becomes blurry. We can also do some camera shake by using the wiggle function. Let's do wiggle position, and here we can play with the options. The amount of pixels we can maybe reduce to 30. The wiggle speed, we can actually make it faster. I think it would look better. You can basically play with these options until you're content. Camera shake is one of the effects we have stolen from live action cinema. Most people think of really heavy action sequence where the camera is moving all over the place, but we can also use it subtly to make the audience feel like we are right there with the characters. We can emulate pans, where I animated the camera in a scene with a special perspective grid to follow the character movements. This type of perspective is just a 360-degree video template, like the ones you would use on Facebook. Another one is to have camera movements motivated by the characters acting, giving the action a lot more strength. This I applied to this scene as well. Okay, so here's with the camera movement and camera shake. As you can see, it's very subtle, but you can feel it. Going back to shading, you may have noticed that I didn't export a highlight pass for this scene. That is because we are going to generate the highlights automatically by using layer styles. For this, we're going back inside the full composition. Now we need to grab everything that's the character inside here and add it to another comp, duplicate this full character, right click and go to layer styles. And we will add an inner shadow. So right now what the layer style is doing, let's make this bigger, is by moving the distance and the angle, it's offsetting the entire silhouette of the character and it has the entire animation. We will create a rim light. So we place it on the front, make the distance way smaller, and we'll change the color to, let's do an orange, more saturated, and the blending mode, let's do linear dodge. And the size is actually how soft edge we want to make it. So let's do like 20. We can also play with the opacity. So this is 100%. Let's go down to 50. There are certain frames where it looks really well. Now we can add this to another pre-comp. We will click to move all attributes into the new layer. So the layer style goes into this. Why? Because this version we want to mask out. This is why we duplicated the comp where we used the layer style on. This is an optional pass, but personally I prefer when highlights are not the same opacity all the way through. See, now you cannot see the rim light beyond the mask. So I will open the mask options and add more feather. So now the highlights will be softer on top. This type of highlights only works if your light source is either behind or to the side of the character. Otherwise, it's gonna make your animation look flat. Highlights can also be painted traditionally, just like we did our shadows. Here's my highlight pass for this scene. And one thing you'll notice is I actually wasn't that careful when painting it, so it doesn't go outside of the character silhouette. This was on purpose, because I wanted it to change the color of the line art. But to do this, I need to make a pre-comp that has all the layers of the character, including the line art. I have moved everything inside here, and if I go back outside, we have this pre-comp, and just like we did before, I will duplicate it, place it on top of the layer that we want to mask, and in the highlights layer, go to matte and select the one on top. Now the character silhouette is what delimits my highlights. I can now use a blending mode like add, lower its opacity, and it's applied. We can also use the rectangle tool to create a mask on top of these highlights, and going to my mask options, I will play with my feather, and what I'm trying to do is to make this soft edge to the highlights. It's also happening right here, and in my opinion this looks better than just a highlight that's the same opacity all throughout. So this is our result so far. I think this is a pretty professional looking shot if we compare to what we had at first. Okay, what if we did a lighting change to indicate that something is going on outside of the ship? That's why she looks so worried about it. For that we will go to layer, new, and adjustment layer. Let's use some levels to change the lighting. Let's make a new one. And in this one, let's do some hue and saturation and colorize everything to red. And I will apply it on top with an overlay blending mode. I will also add an orange solid on top with a lighten blending mode, and then I'm gonna mask it out so it only affects the side of the scene. What happens if we animate their opacity from 0 to that? You can have an idea what's going on.
Will she survive? You know what to do if you want to find out.
Moving the values really helps sell the intensity of the light. If I didn't, it would look like this. But with the values, you can now see how intense is the light that's coming from the front. Now right here, something I don't like when doing this with the values, you can see the white of her teeth and her eyes is blowing up. So the way I will fix this is by again adding another adjustment layer, but inside of the character. At the very end, I just gotta see where does this effect start, right at 4.5 seconds, and I will use curves to crush just the white colors. And with opacity, right here will be 100%, over here 0. Over here should be, see how now the highlight's still pretty strong, but not her white colors. A subtle example of animating a lighting change is this scene. On this side, I made the local colors really dark, but as he gets closer to the right, the local colors start getting brighter and brighter, but the shadow pass remains dark. So if I turn it off, now you can see the difference quite clearly, where his values here are way brighter than when he is over here. He's super dark. If we turn the shadows back on, it seems like it's the lighting from the room. But we're not done yet. Before moving on to exporting, I will give you 10 rapid-fire post-production hacks that will level up your game. If you want access not only to this shot, but all the other ones we've seen in the video, and also to exclusive videos that won't be posted on YouTube, consider checking out my Patreon and its perks. Number 1. Bloom Effect. Duplicate our final composition and look up a curve effect. And what curves do is from left to right, it represents all the values in the scene going from the darkest to the brightest. We're going to crush all the darkest values, but actually make the highlights stronger. Then we're going to look for a Gaussian blur, throw it on top, and give it some blur. And now we have the normal one and this one. And we're going to apply it. Let's try it with some add. Lower the opacity to like 15%. What we're doing with this bloom effect is emulate how the brightest values in a live action film tend to bleed out, causing this look. You can play with your Gaussian blur and your opacity to get the effect you want. Number 2. Fake animated lighting. Here we will use the same bloom effect pass. I did the same thing where I duplicated this pass. Let me turn the opacity back to 100. But you can see I masked it out, so it only affects the windows. I will search for a fast radial blur, which is this one, and throw it on top. And if I make the amount stronger, you can see what's happening. This is just a radial blur that is bleeding out. If I move the point of the radial blur and animate it.
Oh.
What the fuck? Right?
No, yeah.
Here's another scene where I used the same effect. As everything in post-production, you want to be subtle with it, but it creates a really nice effect. Number 3, blur vignette. Use an adjustment layer. Stretch it all the way to the end. And now we're gonna use a camera lens blur. It's gonna make everything blurry, let's even make it stronger. But I will make a selection. Let's move the points. We're going to invert this mask. So actually everything that's outside, it's what's blurry. And then like we've been doing, we're gonna use feather around 500 pixels. So the blur happens little by little. I have done the same thing with an adjustment layer with blur. And using a round mask, you can see if I turn it back on, that it slowly makes everything blurry, except where we want to focus. Number 4, time remap. If for some reason I look at my animation and I say, oh no, this is too fast or too slow, you can remap the timing. To do that, well, first let me turn off all the effects. This is the one that will work, so let me change the color so you can see it very clearly. I will right click, go to time and enable time remapping. And now I will get 2 keyframes. These 2 keyframes are the beginning and end of the scene, so obviously if I bring this one to the middle, now it will be extremely fast. Because I'm making the duration of the scene last half as long. But what we can do is, for example, let's say I want this moment where he's in the air after hitting the floor last for longer. Over here, set a keyframe. In the highest point, set another keyframe. What a painful pose. And here, set another one. And in the middle of those two, here and here, I will set keyframes and grab them closer to the sides. So now this pose will stay for longer on this one, and then this one will happen faster. Let's look at the effect. Terrible, obviously, because it's not how it was animated. But what I want to show is you can effectively set keyframes and move them around to change the timing of your animation if you need to do so. Trust me, eventually that could save your life. Number 5, Bulge. The character animation here killed me. Yeah, that was pretty hard to do. There's no secret to it. It's just doing it rough and praying for the best. But for the background, what I'm actually doing is a single image that when I painted, I was pretty careful as for it to have a seam that I can hide. So over here, the seam enters. And here what it has is an adjustment layer on top with a bulge effect. You can search here for the bulge, and that's what creates this distortion in the center. When you zoom in, you can't really see it, but trust me, you can feel it, and if it wasn't there, it wouldn't work as well. Number 6, lookup tables. You can make a new adjustment layer, stretch it all the way till the end, and look for the lookup table option, or LUT. A lookup table is a color profile that has all the information for how the colors should be graded. You can just Google for free LUTs. There's way too many, just be careful of where you download them. I personally download them from Envato Elements. This is not a sponsored video, but that is what I use to download music and assets for the videos I make. And by using it on an adjustment layer, you can lower the opacity, let's say to 30%. And look at how much difference it's doing. Yeah, it's pretty subtle, but it is there. Number 7, anime line art. You see, I know some of you are very interested in getting that anime look for your animations. The post-production pipeline for anime is quite different in terms of how they do it, but not so much in how it looks. What does make a lot of difference is how they treat their line art. For this, we have to go back to the production stage, where instead of doing cleanup with a normal brush, you will use a brush with no anti-aliasing, meaning it has very hard edges. But the big difference is when we go into After Effects. They use an industry standard plugin from OLM called a smoother that turns this hard edge line into the line that we all know and love. I did it in one frame just to show you. The plugin is completely free to download. Its installation instructions are in English. Here's a comparison of the cleanup that I did versus what would have happened if I used a hard edge brush and used this plugin. So if you are really going for that anime style look, you might consider adding this step to your production and post-production. Number 8, Chromatic Aberration, which is what happens when the red, green and blue channels have a small offset. So first we need everything inside a single composition. So I will grab all of this, Ctrl-Shift-C. I will close the pre-comp we created and now focus on this one. We will search for our effect called Shift Channels, throw it on top, and now we will make 3 copies of the same pre-comp so they all have the same Shift Channels effect. And in the effect, we will leave the first one red and the other 2 will set to off and off. Then we move on to the second one. Red will turn off and leave green on and blue turn off. Finally, the last one, set these 2 to off and just leave the blue channel on. So each one has a different channel on. Now we set these first 2 to an add blending mode and you'll see the sum of these 3 colored channels create the same exact image we had. But now if we grab one of these and press our arrow keys, let's zoom in, we are shifting the channels. Now we'll go to the second one and move it in the opposite direction. And there it is. You can be as strong or as subtle as you want with this. Obviously, I recommend you are subtle. So 1 or 2 pixels to the side for each. Number 9, mask sequence. I wanted to break down this scene as you can see, is one of the most complex ones I've ever done. But everything we've been doing so far is exactly what I did here. If we go inside the character comp, you'll see there's really no shading to this. Aside from some shadows under the nose and on their ears, everything else is just the local colors. Now the reason you may see many masks here is because to be able to animate the father handing the character over to the mom, I had to draw some masks with the kid's silhouette. The purple color is just an image sequence that I exported that allows me to cut into the mother's silhouette so the kid can be on top. The way I apply this matte is by inverting it by clicking on this option. And remember, for a matte to work, the layer that has the matte information has to have its visibility turned off. Once it's turned off, it's working as intended. Number 10, complex scene breakdown. Let's just turn everything off. First, we have the character. We did the same thing as before, where we duplicated this composition and gave it a lazy rim light by using a layer style. Now what I did here is do the same thing a second time, but to actually give it a shadow. Over here what we have is highlights for the eyes, and this is what's coloring everything. It's the same radial blur that we used for the lighting. It just has the opacity way too low. We have a couple of solids on top and below. And lastly, what I did is create a shadow here with a mask. And that's pretty much it. See how the lazy rim light, plus let's say the lazy shadow, and those streams of light coming in with a fast radial blur generate this dreamy effect. As for the ending, we did the same thing with a lighting change, where first I make the values darker, and then this is just animating a mask on top of a black solid for the darkness to come in. Lastly, we added a bloom effect with some radial blur, and the dust particles you can see is just a stock footage of some subtle dust, which I downloaded from Envato again, and these are ready to just import and apply with a linear dodge blending mode. And that is all there is to the scene. As you can see, it's pretty much all the things we've been doing already. Now let's look at how to export things. If you made it this far, this is a secret callout. Tell me in the comments which of these 10 post-production hacks is your favorite and what you're gonna use it for. Thank you for being here. See, most of the time you would just go to File, Export, and Send to a Media Encoder, as it is the best way to export from After Effects. The profile I recommend is clicking here. You want to set your format to H264 and then set your preset by clicking here to Vimeo 1080 Full HD. The resolution you're using will change the amount of bitrate that it needs, but this is a good balance between size and quality. If you are working on any other aspect ratio other than 1080, click on this button. Everything else will be already set, just click OK, select where you want to save it, then click OK, and start rendering by clicking on this little play icon. If for some reason you cannot use Media Encoder, we can also just press Ctrl and M to send this project to the render queue inside of After Effects. Click where it says lossless, change the format. The most common is H264. Watch out for your audio options to be on if you need them. I'm gonna turn it off. Click OK, and now on this text you can select where you want it to save. And now you can press render. And this is our final result. If you want to learn exactly how to cel shade your animation before exporting it to After Effects, check out my video on cel shading, which is coming up next.
Careful when you look that up, who's around.
Well, you said this is Egypt. What is this?
What, they do like the Anubis stuff.
Anubis? All I'm seeing is ass.